Richard Lucas, the leader of the Scottish Family Party. John William Noble, who you have already met, involved in various things with the schools and a pastor, and Andrea Williams, the Chief Executive of Christian Concern and the Christian Legal Centre. So things that you heard of already, and I know you might have some questions, so if you would like to ask, and then Maury can, anybody with a question to start off that you have heard today or things that are concerning you. Maury's going to run around, burn that food already. You'll be hungry again after this.
Hello. It was a question for Andrea about the size and shape of Christian Concern in Scotland. The size and shape of Christian Concern in Scotland. So in particular, my understanding is that the UNCRC has been copied pretty much directly into Scots law, and you didn't mention that explicitly. And I think that's not the case in England and Wales, and that highlights the need for bespoke local legal expertise, and I wonder if that exists within Christian Concern Scotland. Thank you.
Yes. Well, we're Christian Concern. We don't have an office in Scotland. We don't have a I suppose that there is a reality, partly because of how the organisation has evolved, that we're quite London-centric presently. That's just the truth. I always say that part of my life, strangely, has been in a very sort of like 1 square mile between the Royal Courts of Justice, Parliament, the Westminster Parliament, and the BBC studios. It used to kind of like be a little triangle, and my office was in the middle. We would do. That's really where we're operating in law and media and politics. We care about Scotland and everything else, but the truth is your system is entirely different. So the law is entirely different here. So I can no more litigate in Scotland than I can in Italy or I can in Hungary. And so what we did with the Scottish Church Challenge was we found Scottish lawyers on the ground that were Christian and believed in it too, and then we were able to work with them. And I have to say that our knowledge as a result of the work that we've done over more than 2 decades in England really helped to shape the arguments, because we have been ahead, and that's what we need to do more and more here, and I'd love to see that happen very specifically in Scotland. I mean, I think there have been groups Christian Institute I know is on the ground here, CARE has been on the ground here, so I know that there are groups that are on the ground here. We've tended to go where we've been responsive. That's not a way necessarily to be strategic about what you do, but the work of Christian Concern has been very much to be a service operator. If people have a need, a legal need, let's say, we look after them. If there's a bill that's before Parliament, so that we do actually respond to Scottish consultations and so on. We've done every single one. We've done that, but we've created a parliamentary campaign around that. What we've done in Scotland has been more that we've written in to the Scottish Parliament. We've supported other initiatives, but it might be that has to change. But then it's a question of personnel, and it's a question of finances, and it's a question of really understanding the territory. And something that I've learned, because we are, who would think, what Christian Concern, what we've done. I'm sorry this has taken a bit long, but what we've done, I don't feel like I'm speaking very concisely today, but what we've done is, as a result of living this and seeing and standing really since 1990 against the erosion of Christianity in public life, and particularly in the laws, we're able to, people call upon us. So we've gone to these other nations. So we have gone to Italy, we've gone to Hungary, we've gone to Poland, we've gone to Nepal, we've gone to South Korea because they've asked us to go there. We've gone to Colombia, gone to Peru. And there they're seeing all the stuff that's happened in England and Wales. They're seeing it all happening there, of course, and it's happening in Scotland too. What we have to work out is how we build a resistance in those territories on the ground to be more than just a sort of conference speaker, to zoom in and zoom out. So, and whether we really can sustain it. Because if you start something, you have to be able to finish it, by faith. We have to do it well. So that's, these are the challenges.
The other thing I could say, maybe, we'll see what's going to happen with Unite for Education and, having different organizations and partnering with different people like Christian Concern, Scottish Family Party, CVE, and getting others involved as well. And, that could be the avenue that we could be, going through something with that.
There needs to be a coalition to resist.
Yeah.
Resist this conversion practices confrontation that's coming through right now. There needs to be an army. I know Pastor David was speaking about it earlier. But there absolutely needs to be, a visible army that we can see that is rising up. The Scottish pastors, because they stood, you maintained in your country something that is precedent-setting across the world. Constitutional setting and precedent-setting. And who'd have thought that 27 pastors could do that, but just by standing up and actually just really doing it? But they did. And that's what we've got to believe. We've got to, you've got to take those steps. So we do need to see that rising Gideon army. We need to see the pastors taking a lead, because it's not just legal challenges, it's actually pastors raising up the people, and in this circumstance bringing them out on the streets and saying, why convert? If you stop us converting, we've got a problem.
Thank you. Next question. Anybody with a question for the panel? Yep. Phil?
I was just looking through the conversion therapy kind of guidelines things a couple of nights ago, just scanning them very quickly. And it seemed like the people in the worst place were parents, because it said that basically conversion therapy happening to a minor, kind of exacerbated its seriousness. Also where there was mental health issues. And it really struck me that basically everyone who's got the issues with gender identity, it always goes along with kind of mental health issues as well. But then for churches, it said that the pastor could lose their position and the church could lose their charity status. I'm wondering what happens when it's reached that point. So if the church says, right, happy to lose charity status, what authority can they use to say that the pastor can't minister in a sort of independent church or something like that? What would be the legal way that they could enforce that?
Statute, so they'll be able to use the even if you say, Christian Concern isn't a charity because we don't want to be bound by charitable laws. Again, there's a great irony there, because originally charity was understood to be Christian, and there was exemption given in order to profit Christian works within society. That's how the original charity law was written. But now, of course, you have to promote the government ideological agenda. They will again. I've not got it in front of me, but the point that they will be able to say, if they think a child is in harm, has harm, then they the state says we can come in and we believe that conversion therapy is a harm. We believe that it harms the child, and therefore that child should be separated from the parent. A little bit like the government says, this is COVID, we are telling you that what's best for your health is to stay at home. The person is gender confused, we're telling you that unless you affirm that child in their chosen gender, we will remove the child because the government knows best in health, because we are now responsible for your health. So it's going to use all the things that they already have.
Just a quick comment on this. When a number of church leaders in Scotland signed the letter, putting their name to it, there was quite a bit of flack that we received on social media. And it's also interesting to find from a pastor's perspective that one thing that these groups don't have that pastors and Christians should have is anywhere near an accurate grasp of what God's word actually says. So, for example, when I'm engaged in evangelism and when we're talking about the topic of conversion, if someone's saying, "Oh, you're trying to convert me, you're trying to make me do this," the first thing I'll point to is, well, praise be to God that I'm not the one who's actually going to make you a Christian. This is actually a work that the Lord does. And I think when I consider back to the judicial review when there was the threat of churches being closed down and not being allowed to meet over the COVID situation, I think it was important for us to uphold what was biblically true, but also to try to box clever without actually taking away from what we doctrinally stand on. So we were wanting to affirm, for example, that we love our neighbour and we are treating ill health, these matters seriously, this sort of thing. So we're not looking to be antagonistic in these fronts, because obviously we know what they're trying to get at. It's that, pastors and churches, they're homophobic and they just want to make people feel like this or that. So I think it's important that we are communicating the fact that we do have a love and a care for people. And this is something that right now, as I've noticed, when it comes to the issues on that front, it's normally they go for language that's seemingly inflammatory. So I think there needs to be a degree of wisdom as we're upholding biblical truth at this point, as well as, crucially, clarifying and taking a stand on Scripture where it is needed. And in many ways, for example, here, it is crucially needed.
That's right. Richard, do you want to say anything about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's conversion therapy bans coming in around the world. But the one in Scotland, I think, is going to be world leading. The Scottish government loves saying it's world leading. So it's going to be, the worst in the world. That's their ambition. And listening to them discuss it in the Parliament has been unbelievable. They had someone saying, some people think electric shock therapy is worse than praying. But don't have that. Praying can be just as bad as electric shock therapy. And they're saying, trying to speak to someone about their gender identity or sexuality, it's a form of torture. And you can't consent to torture. So therefore, no one can actually consent to having a conversation about their sexuality or gender identity with a view to moving on from where they are. I mean, it's so extreme. It's so ludicrously extreme. Yet in the Scottish Parliament, there's not a single MSP who is opposing the conversion therapy ban. Not one MSP. So Scotland is just absolutely at the leading edge of this, and there will be a fight against it, but there's just one thing after another coming from Scotland because of the lack of pushback against it. The so-called progressive side more or less has its own way in Scotland for the time being.
Yeah, great. We got a question here, Murray. Yep.
Right, hello. Mine's is kind of two-parted here. Right, in England, you've got what's called Gaelic competency, and in Scotland, we've got something which is so far worse. It's called the Age of Legal Capacity Act, 1991, and it gives children of a very young age, 12, 14, rights, and the rights are to defy their parents. Right. For example, if in the opinion, section 2.4, the medical practitioner present believes that the child understands all the implications of a medical procedure, they're allowed to go ahead without the permission of parents. Now, that could be anything from contracepting that child, that could be giving them RU486, that could be giving them a medical abortion, and these days, that could also be giving them puberty blockers, right, binders, or going on to surgery. And I don't believe a word that this Parliament says today, tomorrow, or at any time in the future. They are not to be trusted. And what I would like to know is how they talk a lot about the rights of the child. Everything's getting it right for every child and the rights of the child. But what about the rights of the child not to have their brains polluted, not to have their brains confused, not to have been converted in another way in which the Scottish Government would like them to do?
Yeah.
And how we could actually challenge that legally on behalf of a child. That, a parent could be launching a challenge like that against Scottish Government.
Yeah. So in Scotland, that's why it's so important who we vote for and what we stand for. And this is why we have the Scottish Family Party. So if every church stands up for truth, every church comes together and votes the Scottish Family Party, and we get into Parliament, we can make that difference. So it's who you're voting for and what you're standing for. And so that's the very important thing, because you need the right people in Parliament. There is nobody standing for that at the moment, and this is why we are here. The Scottish Family Party is here for that. Yeah.
I'm in my 7th decade, and I've now realised it really doesn't matter who you vote for. The government always gets in. And the reason for that is because you always have these civil servants, or as I call them, civil serpents, in the back.
Well, we can get rid of them with the Scottish Family Party, so I'm going to get Richard to speak about that a bit more.
Thanks very much. I think it's easy to get cynical about politics and think, your vote doesn't make a difference. But ultimately, we are in a democracy. They add up the votes, and the people who get the most votes go into the Parliament, and they make these laws, and they bring in these dreadful policies. That's what happens. So one of the ways we have to challenge it, we fight it on all fronts, but one of the ways we have to challenge it is through the political system as well. Absolutely. You were saying about this sort of age of consent, 12, to medical procedures, to confidentiality to parents. That should have been, and still should be, a massive political controversy in Scotland. Because 13-year-olds can go and have an abortion, speak to the doctor about it. They're getting headaches when they're smoking cannabis. They want to change gender or whatever. This can all go on without the parent being informed. It's just completely wrong. I heard a story once, a former deputy head teacher, and she knew a pupil had had an abortion. And the mum and dad were talking to the deputy head teacher and saying, our daughter, she's just not herself these days. I don't know what's wrong. There's just something on her mind. We'd love to help her, but we just don't know what the issue is. And the deputy head teacher stood there knowing that this girl had had an abortion a few weeks earlier, and she wasn't allowed to say to the parents. I say that should be a massive political scandal. But as is sadly so often the case in Scotland, barely a ripple. Well, no ripple at all. I've never heard it spoken about by any politician in the media or at all. There's total lack of controversy about it.
Just one thing to say with regards to the lack of communication, and deliberately so. Even in the immediate context that I'm in with members of my church, one of which is trying to get their daughter out of state education right now, they keep noticing new things that are being dripped in. And I mean, I'm not a legal expert, but I'm obviously curious to see how things are being put into education right now without the parents say so. So, for example, in this school where they've got a deputy head teacher who's a professing Christian, the mother noticed that there were at least, I think, 2 or 3 hours in this girl's week with this name that she didn't recognize. So this apparently was a member of the I think it was a member of some distant connection of a member of the Scottish Government coming to teach life skills. And this had not been communicated to the parents. There was no consultation about it. And any time that I found parents are trying to ask questions about what's being taken place, they're trying to even literally hide the jotters of the schoolwork and this sort of thing. So the level of quite literal, blatant deception in this front is very explicit. And I think one of the problems that I've found is that parents, at the moment, they seem to not realize that they can actually ask questions and challenge. They do have a right to see what their children are doing. They do have a right to ask what their children are being subjected to. And I think this is a crucial thing that churches need to recognize in terms of taking a stand and just doing what really should be the basics on this front. But this is something that I think over the decades we've become so trusting of systems that now we're waking up and saying, wow, we've got to this place. This has not happened overnight. This has taken many years to get to this point. And again, it's why on a political level, though I can certainly share the sentiments of why people would be cynical, we still should be doing something about this. And that's why, for example, the work of the Scottish Family Party as a crucial context in Scotland is such an encouraging thing, because this is the way by which that difference can actually be made.
Just to respond on that, I think what surprises me is that how passive parents can be, how quiet they can be. I mean, I remember when Lily was born 27 years ago, I honestly thought it felt like no one had ever given birth before. I mean, I was absolutely besotted, like no one was ever going to harm this child. I was totally blown away. I couldn't get, and I still feel the same today. Honestly, if Lily's unhappy, I'm unhappy. And it was the most extraordinary emotion. I don't really understand how we've got to a place where we've become so just passive as parents. We hand them into these places where this sort of stuff that John Williams just spoken about takes place. But, it's in part, part of it is, and we sort of saw this, we saw this very clearly in COVID. People follow, they're sheep. Everybody just goes with the flow. They don't want a hard life. They don't want to be unpopular. And so what then happens is without a vision, the people perish. And if there are no leaders, if the gospel isn't being properly, if the gospel in the churches, Christian leaders, political leaders, leaders in industry, leaders in teaching, leaders and policymakers. I mean, if people aren't passionate about Christ and passionate about the truth, then those are the people that are passionate for a different religion, a different ideology, who are for a different king, a different leader, take the space. And we've become very, very subdued. Christians just become subdued. We don't actually love him enough, It's like we don't believe he will really act. It's like we don't really believe in the power of the gospel. We don't really believe that if we stand, something will change. Well, I'm just telling you, just a few of you that are in this room, if you stand, if you show up, if you act and believe, the Lord will do way beyond what you can imagine. It's faith as small as a mustard seed. Do I have faith as small as a mustard seed that would stop the conversion practices legislation in this country? Do I have it? Do you have it?
Amen. We have some questions there and then in the front as well.
It's regarding free speech. Recently John Mason was disciplined by the SNP for his objection to about his views on abortion, and particularly the right to protest against it. Yeah. Now, I'm wondering how this hate speech is going to affect the preaching of the gospel. Are Christian ministers likely to be criminalized for calling people a sinner or preaching against homosexuality or
it's happening already, right?
Issues which are contrary to the Word of God?
It's already happening. Andrea will just tell you about that, and then Richard.
We could show on. It's probably not on there. But we could show we can't show the video. No. We probably look after, I'd say on average, about 2 street preachers a week. So we once a month we're on the phone to police officers, and probably once every 2 months looking after people who've been put in a cell, sometimes held overnight, for preaching the gospel on the streets of Britain. We've got school chaplains losing their jobs, several of them, not just several of them. Again, they're very scared. These school chaplains, they love the Lord, but they've become very scared. They've often got children in the school. They don't want to upset their children. They don't want to upset staff. Very often, these are in true Christian schools. The other thing that I say as a warning is that we're really literally seeing, it's John 10, it's Christian brother against Christian brother. You know, in these, you're seeing people that you would expect to stand, they're actually not standing. Real Christian people that really preach faithfully the gospel. At this, they can preach faithfully on who Jesus is, and they can expound the scriptures absolutely brilliantly. But at that moment, when they're asked to stand on what marriage is, or in a school situation or something, they falter. And I've recently seen a Christian headmaster of a Christian school absolutely violated and thrown out by other evangelical leaders in our country. So the answer is yes. We've defended hundreds of street preachers, and they're coming after ministers too. It's absolutely there. But so far, we have a 100% success record on street preachers. So we've kept the gospel open, and we'll do the same for every street preacher.
As a pastor, how would you answer that?
So I'm involved in street evangelism. We go out to preach in the streets of Aberdeen, and there's often the threat that I'm going to report to you, and the complaint that people bring to us. Obviously, in terms of calling the police, this is something that once or twice has happened in the Aberdeen setting, but it's never led to us explicitly going to a prison or anything of that nature. But I want to share a couple of other examples that I know, just to give you a realistic feel for where we're at. So one of the most aggressive contexts is if anyone is preaching the gospel out of any abortion clinics. So I know of a pastor friend of mine in Bristol, and they were literally hounded into I think it was a shopping mall complex where they were trapped. They asked the security of the shopping mall, and they did nothing. They asked the police to come, and it was hours before they came. And the people, some of them were teenagers, part of this team from the church, were scared out of their wits, wondering whether they were going to get attacked. So it's not just the fact that sometimes the police are interpreting the law to try to arrest these street preachers. It's also just the environment, the culture, the attitude of people towards them, as though they're the antagonists and they deserve what they're getting. So that's the realistic climate in which we're in. And again, when you're in this setting, you almost need to be an expert in the law now if you're going out into the streets of Aberdeen or wherever it is in the UK. I mean, we've kind of got our kind of arguments ready. And we're not, again, it's not trying to be antagonistic, but we know it's going to come. I mean, that is now what we expect. It's just the reality of where we're at here.
Can I just talk as well? Just that something that happens is one of the things we do say, and it's a little bit uncomfortable, we say to the street preachers, do make sure you've got a recording of everything. Because, it's an obvious point, but the things that they say of the street preachers, the things that they say that they are saying are never true. So then when we have the recording back, we get into trouble when the street preachers haven't recorded it, because they will always believe the aggressor. They will always believe the person that's trying to shut the street preacher down.
Yeah, thank you. Just say a bit about John Mason in particular. Obviously, the free speech issues are very real. I would say with John Mason's case in the SNP, I wouldn't class that as a freedom of speech issue. I think a political party can say, this is what we stand for, and if you're going to represent this party, you have to toe the line. Every political party does that. The SNP, as it happens, is a fanatically pro-abortion party. So if they want to say to their representatives, if you don't toe our party line, you're going to be in trouble. I think that's perfectly reasonable behaviour for a political party. So with John Mason, to my mind, it's not a freedom of speech issue. It's a being in the wrong party issue. But in terms of street preaching, I've got a little story as well. A chap in Glasgow was preaching away, and a gay gentleman came along, and he said to him, "You hate me, don't you?" And the street preacher said, "No, I don't hate you. I love you and I'll pray for you." And he said, "Do you hate me?" And this man said, "Yes, I hate you." And then this man went to the police officer there, who'd seen the whole thing, and reported the street preacher, and the street preacher was arrested. So the street preacher was arrested for preaching love after being reported by a hater. And that street preacher, he's been in court, is he 13 times? He gets thrown out every time, but that's one.
Mari, do you want to just say something about the abortion stuff, like regarding, standing outside and what you experience and stuff? Because Mari is actually, right now, they are every day until end of November, they outside clinics just with little boards praying, and they get so much of persecution. So maybe you just want to share a little on that as well.
Yeah, I think the kind of thing that we experience is verbal abuse. It's kind of a continual stream, really, of just shame on you is the most commonly used one. We get called all sorts, but this week we've actually seen a bit of I think most people are saying this year is actually there's a escalation in the volume of abuse. We've seen the school kids beginning to get a bit emboldened, which is quite concerning. We're right beside a school, Catholic school, ironically. And we had something thrown at us yesterday, which is quite, so it's just, yeah. And you kind of feel it doesn't matter how hard you work at getting everything right, just anything will be twisted and used against you. Yeah. And lies will be spoken about. You just saw something in the evening news that saying that the 40 Days for Life vigil participants were jeering at somebody going for an abortion, which just doesn't happen. It's just lies, it's just, and it's very hard to kind of hear that, and just feel so powerless really to do anything about it. And in fact, I would maybe ask a question would be, at what point can you do something? Maybe to Andrea, at what point can you do something?
40 Days for Life in Birmingham, because they've been removed and a buffer zone's been put around the clinic. I know that 40 Days for Life has a policy of no recording. But I mean, even if you don't video record, I mean, even to audio record, in order to set the record straight, I think is quite important. Because I mean, there are also sort of very sophisticated recording type devices now, which you can, that just like it just looks like a little button, and that would be absolutely fine to be used only when lies is then spoken against you. So you can go back to that newspaper to set the record straight. These sorts of things, or when things come against you. I think that this one is a little bit like Wilberforce for me. Clarkson went up and down the country. Tomatoes were thrown at him, but he was basically exposing the reality of abortion on the ground. He would take shows of what the conditions were like in slave ships. All of that happened. You then also had Wedgwood, creating beautiful ornaments or beautiful badges saying, "Am I not human too?" And I think that over time, but over decades, remember 70 years is a short time and a long time. Do not underestimate the power of what you are doing now. And let me say this as a kind of veteran campaigner, a veteran life campaigner. I'm seeing a rising generation. I'm seeing more visibility on the streets. I'm seeing more cultural engagement on this issue. I'm seeing more pro-life youngsters. I'm seeing that they are passionate. I'm seeing that people understand this as a pro-life issue. I can see this turning around. So we will see a difference. So it hurts. It's cranking up. That's good news. That's good news, because the battle's getting more visible, more vocal, and we know who wins in the end. So So I think it's getting better. I think the March for Life, this sort of stuff that's happening, I think is getting better overall.
Because of time, if we can get the three questions together, and then we'll just round up. Yeah. So, do you have a question?
Well, yes, I do. Thanks.
Yeah.
How did we ever get into this mess? I was in politics up until 36 years ago till the Lord set me free. In these days, we had 6 branches in the constituency party I was in. Policy was formed by somebody making a motion at the branch meeting. If it was carried here, it went to the constituency party. If it was carried here, it went to the national conference. Very often I would take something with me. And if it was carried here, it became party policy. Are you with me? So when it became party policy, it became in the manifesto. When they came up to the elections, you had a hustings. I don't know if you understand what hustings means. You would sit down and listen to the candidates.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen now. So what we've opened the door to that gang hut up there, because that only is a gang hut. What that is when round about all that, how did it ever get that onto a manifesto? Can that be challenged legally? Because I think that would be one of the ways of shutting them up, so that I can get out in the streets and preach the gospel.
Yeah.
Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's good.
Smashing,
Can we
let
get
them answer.
Murray, can we get Pastor Sue and Mark, and then we'll just round up.
Quick statement out of sympathy for what you said, and you are, in my opinion, you are right. If you do some investigation, you may find that the last 2 council elections in Scotland, they were actually calculated at the end with the votes by using digital voting machines. Within the mayoral election in London, they did use digital voting machines. Just quickly, we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but principalities and powers. James has mentioned UNCHR, which I think, James, you're referring to the UN. John, you're talking about how do we get here in regard to the policy, and believe it or not, and I'm up for political activism, totally, but we have a structure already in this world of a one world government structure. Within the UN, etc., this is real. This is where a load of this stuff is coming from, and that is what we're dealing with. And finally, and hearing this, because I know some of the people's stories here, our biggest fight seems to be within the church itself.
Yeah. Pastor Sue?
We're here for children. We hear about schools. I want to take us back into the classroom and ask this question. Am I worrying unnecessarily that if a Christian child is still in a school and they get depressed, if they were going towards a gender thing, they would be given puberty blockers, etc., not known by their parents, but everybody else would be seeing? What about a child that may have a tendency to be sad or going through a tough time at home? Could they end up with antidepressants and the whole pathway towards, God forbid, this euthanasia thing?
That's what it's leading to, right? I just wanted to say something. The issue is, where's the church? Where's the church? If we can stand together, we can make that difference, right? That's why we need to unite. Where's the church? The problem, it all started, the church was the one that had everything, owned everything, gave it away. So where is the church today? So I'm going to let Richard, Andrea, and then John William, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, thank you. I think the points about the influence of international bodies since the UN are very significant. If you look at what's happening in countless other countries around the world, it's exactly the same thing. It's as though the cue comes from international bodies, then lots of nations think, oh, it's time for same-sex marriage. Oh, it's time for a conversion therapy ban. So it's international forces that we're against. I wouldn't overplay the influence of the United Nations. I do believe that that sovereign states such as Britain or the Scottish government as well, they can make their own decisions. They don't have to go along with these other organizations, but they are highly influential. I would probably interpret what you're saying is you're suggesting the possibility of electoral fraud. I would be very cautious about doing that without extremely solid evidence. I think that's potentially a dangerous road to go down. In terms of the issues with the church, the thing I often find myself saying to people, as I just encourage you to get my book from the Scottish Family Party bookstall, Christians in Politics, is all about these issues of various arguments that Christians put in between themselves and actually speaking out on these issues. So as leader of the Scottish Family Party, I've heard lots of Christians giving reasons why you shouldn't really bring these things up. And I've gone through them one at a time and hopefully dismantle them. So I would encourage you to have a read of that. And yet the thing about the way over 12s are treated in Scotland, what you are suggesting in that scenario is absolutely what is already happening. It's not what might happen, it's what's already happening in countless cases. So.
We are dealing with 2 cases at the moment where children are in school. They've told the school that they want to identify in the opposite gender. The parents don't want them to. And social services visit and monitor the home and threaten removal. We've had other cases where we've got counselling or proper psychiatric medical help for the child, and we've actually seen the child live congruent to their sex and are very pleased, ultimately, that they didn't go the way of the social services and schools. So this, we've got to be very firm, and I'm a great advocate of withdrawing children in that situation, fleeing if necessary. I'm getting to the point where I say you've got to flee the situation. I want to also say that I've been to nations, so if you go to somewhere like Hungary or Poland, they actually are putting in pro-life, pro-family policies. They're encouraging marriage, encouraging having children, and you're seeing a turnaround in those nations. You are literally, and it's very interesting to me that sort of Central European bloc has resisted the policies of Brussels. I'm also fascinated that Italy was going the way of Brussels, as it were. It's been very fascinating to see the new Prime Minister say this. Since when was it that a love of nation, a love of God, a love of nation, a love of family made you a fascist, right-wing homophobe? So it's quite interesting to see how that this new Prime Minister has been elected and says that, and of course that is true. So I think these things are interesting. Remember that without God, without the church singing loud and clear, the truth can be hurt a lot. So without the kind of the mercy and grace, a lot of these things tempered. This is the thing. Without God as well, without a real belief in God, I think things cannot feel great. That's why it's this whole package.
Just one thing also to add regarding that situation you're talking about with the child who may lead to the antidepressants and potentially getting to that stage. I think we have to, as a church, as Christian parents now, reconcile that. There is something preemptive about taking our children out, but obviously, as we've identified today, what is best for the child according to what's scriptural? And if parents are of the mind that this sort of thing is even remotely possible, then if they're willing to take that risk that something of that happens, then this is obviously significantly problematic. I think the other thing that concerns me deeply is that what may be revealed as the months and years roll on is some shocking things that are taking place within state education that are already unraveling as we're seeing now. And the longer this continues, the more of a concern it's going to be. And is the church in 5-10 years going to be looking back and thinking, well, yeah, we maybe should have said something, or trying to justify the action. Now is the time. I mean, already, years ago, it should have been, but now is the time, surely, that we're going to take such significant action. Because if we're talking on this level, if we're talking on the level that this is what may happen in state education, then we already are way, way, way far beyond trying to kind of manage this situation.
And it's not even may, is it? Because it actually is happening.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much to Richard, Andrea, and John William. Thank you for joining the session.